Mercedes-Benz C300. Its 3.5 litre V6 250 brake horsepower rear-wheel drive configuration will propel you to 100 km an hour in just under 5.5 seconds. Sleek European lines ooze precise design and specification. Its sound lets you know you're not driving just another V6 sporty sedan, and it's all reflected in the looks you get when you drive past the shoppers on a Sunday afternoon. This car is the epitome of a luxury sedan. You've got leather everything, power everything, satellite navigation, Bluetooth, iPod, vented seats, heated seats, and even the star on the bonnet that tells you that you are driving something more than an average runabout. This car is an extreme example of the dubbed Australia tax, a premium you and I seem to pay just because we live in the land down under. Despite all the positives that this car has, there is one overarching problem, and that's the price. You see, this car will set you back roughly $115,000 in Australian money. So that means it's really at the high end of the luxury spectrum when it comes to purchasing cars. But in the United States, it's not. Mind you, not everyone is going to want a German-produced super luxury sedan sitting in their garage. But what about something a touch closer to home? Something you and I use every single day. This is a Pilot BP 145M. It's a black retractable ballpoint pen that you can buy at just about any stationery store around Sydney. Here in Australia, a pack of these will set you back around about $40 for 12. And this is a Pilot BP 145M that I bought from the United States. A pack of 12 of these, of the exact same pen, will set you back just $9. And I want to know why. It's the one problem with living in Australia. Anything imported, from computers and software to books and power tools, is expensive. Despite most Australians knowing this, however, the stigma has been to buy local for many years, if only to support Australian businesses and help the economy stay strong. In recent years, however, and especially with the advent of online purchasing, Australians have been realising that those imported goods attract a premium price in this country, and that we're all paying for it. It's a price that most retailers and suppliers chalk up to handling charges, shipping, import duties, taxes, and of course the profit for the local store. But some have noticed that digital copies, too, are affected by these same factors, none more so than university students across Australia. With so many uni students already struggling to keep their head above the water, this couldn't be more of a problem. Stephanie Bolchin, a visual communications student at the University of Technology in Sydney, has some issues with the price of things, such as software and technology in this country. Things which she says are essential for her degree.
We do need a lot of programs and things like that, so we're going to need most of the Adobe programs like Illustrator, InDesign and Photoshop, to just name a few, and they are quite expensive for us. It's either about $30 a month to pay for it, or you pay for it in bulk, which I can't remember how much it was, but as a student who's quite busy, I actually probably couldn't work enough to make that a viable means.
Undoubtedly, one big question that we all ask is why? Why is it that we are paying for these outlandish prices on seemingly everyday items? If you ask the everyday shopper, then they say it's all the retailer's fault. The retailers blame the importers, and the importers stay tight-lipped about their practices and their prices. Whilst researching for this report, I rang a host of suppliers and companies into Australia that supplied goods such as cameras, TVs, other consumer electronics, cars, stationery, and musical instruments. Of the 20 plus companies that I rang, not one has yet returned my call. During the research, however, I did find a statement from Apple, the tech supergiant behind the super profitable iPod and iPhone, and more recently the iPad. The company, along with Adobe and Microsoft, were subpoenaed in front of a government commission into digital and IT pricing in Australia. And the response these tech giants gave to the question of why their products were much more expensive here as opposed to in the United States was broad. Take Apple's Tony King, for example.
Apple must consider differences between countries in product costs, freight charges, local sales taxes, levies, import duties, channel economics, competition, and local laws regarding advertised prices.
In the digital world, it is a lot easier to point the finger. However, in the case of a physical retail world, the blame game gets a tad bit harder. Whilst it is easy to question why a downloaded song costs 99 cents in the United States but $1.69 here in Australia, it is harder to quantify why that Pilot pen is a whole 4 times the price here than in the United States, or why that Mercedes-Benz is a lot more expensive here than across the Pacific. And this is where it gets interesting. When you start at the final price of, for example, the car, and take off our 10% GST, you come to $103,500. Take off the luxury car tax at 33%, and you get just a touch over $69,000. Taking off the import duties brings you down to just a touch over $59,000 at $59,289.97. However, we are still a touch short of the $45,000 that is seen in the United States. As a percentage, that's roughly 30% more than what the United States is paying. This 30 to 50% price hike we see on most items here in Australia just so happens to be how much extra Australians make per year over our friends across the Pacific. With their minimum wage being $7.50 an hour as opposed to ours at $15.50 an hour, the question has to be asked, are these companies and importers aware of this fact and hitting your hip pocket simply because they can? Ross Greenwood, financial analyst and financial reporter for Channel 9, believes that it is a combination of many factors that give us this thing some call the Australia tax.
Yeah, well, it's true. Let's say, for example, you've got to take different examples of this. Now, cars is one really good example. Because Australia has got a luxury sales tax on cars, which is the highest in the world, and also comes in at probably one of the lowest levels in the world, there's no doubt in my mind that that's one of the things that makes our cars more expensive. Then there's another issue, and that is that Australia is a much, much smaller market. So if you go, say, to the United States or Europe, you'll find that the competition, because of the volume of cars that are being sold, is much greater. And as a result, that will drive down the price. Because there's less competition and there's many more brands in the marketplace here, well, really, that's one of the reasons why most of the brands come here, because they know they can get that extra premium.
So then, whom are the hardest hit by all of these factors? Students, those with lower incomes, and even small businesses can find it difficult to remain competitive in this high-priced world. But worse still are those in our community who are disabled. Specialist machines to help them go about their daily activities normal tasks that we would take for granted are far more expensive here than anywhere else in the world.
I am Erin Turner. I'm ACAN's Policy and Campaigns Officer. I've done our work on IT pricing.
The ACCAN, or the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network, this year submitted to the inquiry on digital goods pricing, specifically focusing on those disadvantaged by the high prices set here in Australia.
With physical products, it is really hard to unpick exactly how much extra Australians should be paying. One example we've been looking at is disability products, hardware for people with disability, particularly with print disability. There's a lot of essential equipment that lets people who are blind, for example, engage with the world in the way that I would normally, but the equipment's really costly. There's one piece of equipment called the Braille Note. It allows people who are blind to access a computer. There's a little script down the bottom that reads the information off the screen and translates it into Braille, so they can just essentially read through Braille what's on a computer screen. This piece of equipment in Australia costs about 3/4 of a disability pension in a single year. For anyone on a disability pension, that's completely out of reach.
At the present moment, it seems that we Australians know we are being ripped off by big business here in Australia. The trouble is, there isn't much that we can do about it, and it's almost impossible to prove. With the laws that are currently governing the Australian retail sector, it seems that the pens will stay the price they are for now, and you'll just have to wait a while for that new Mercedes. It seems the only thing the Australian consumer can do is vote with their feet. And with the rise recently in online transactions, it is most certainly that it seems that is exactly what they are doing. The only drawback is that you can't download a car. Dave Roberts for UTS News.